The escape pod tumbled through the crimson atmosphere of Kepler 442b like a dying star, its hull glowing white-hot from atmospheric friction. Inside, 3-year-old Marcus Chen slept peacefully, unaware that his parents had just made the ultimate sacrifice. The colony ship New Eden had been destroyed by the Vorthak Empire, leaving only scattered escape pods drifting through space like seeds on a cosmic wind. The pod's automated systems screamed warnings in a dozen languages as it plummeted toward the alien world below. Emergency protocols engaged, deploying parachutes and activating emergency beacons, but the landing was still brutal. The pod carved a smoking furrow through crystalline forest before coming to rest in a valley filled with strange, luminescent flowers that pulsed with their own inner light. For 3 days, Marcus remained sealed inside the pod while its life support systems gradually failed. His cries echoed through the metallic chamber, growing weaker as hunger and thirst took their toll. The emergency beacon pulsed uselessly, broadcasting to a galaxy where humanity was already considered extinct. On the 4th day, they came. The Zarathi were unlike any wolves Earth had ever known, standing nearly 4 feet tall at the shoulder. Their bodies were covered in iridescent fur that shifted between deep blue and silver, depending on the light. Their eyes glowed with an inner intelligence that spoke of thousands of years of evolution, on a world where survival required more than just instinct. They possessed a rudimentary understanding of technology, having observed the rise and fall of several civilizations on their world, and their pack structure was based on complex social hierarchies that would have impressed human anthropologists. The alpha female, whom Marcus would later call Zara, approached the smoking wreckage with cautious curiosity. Her pack flanked her, 12 other Zarathi moving with fluid grace through the alien vegetation. They had heard the crash and seen the fire in the sky, and their collective intelligence told them this was something unprecedented. Zara's enhanced senses detected the life signs immediately. The scent was alien but unmistakably that of a young creature in distress. Using her powerful claws, she began working at the pod's emergency release mechanisms, her packmates joining the effort. Their primitive understanding of technology, gained from observing ancient ruins scattered across their world, proved sufficient to trigger the manual override. When the pod's door finally hissed open, releasing a cloud of stale air and human pheromones, the Zarathi pack encountered something that would change their species forever. Marcus lay curled in his safety harness, his small human form dwarfed by the alien technology surrounding him. His dark hair was matted with sweat, and his olive skin had taken on an unhealthy pallor from dehydration. Zara's maternal instincts, evolved over millions of years to protect the pack's young, immediately recognized the universal signs of a lost cub. Species barriers meant nothing to those ancient drives. She carefully lifted Marcus from the pod, her massive jaws gentle enough to hold a soap bubble without breaking it. The child stirred in her grasp, his eyes fluttering open to reveal deep brown irises that reflected the alien sky above. The other pack members circled nervously, uncertain about this strange addition to their family. The beta male, a scarred veteran named Thorn, growled low in his throat, expressing the pack's collective uncertainty. But Zara's decision was absolute. In Zarathi culture, the alpha's word was law, and she had claimed this strange cub as her own. Marcus's first attempts to communicate were met with patient listening. The Zarathi possessed a complex language of growls, barks, and body language that had evolved over millennia. They understood that this small creature was trying to speak in its own tongue, and they began the slow process of teaching him theirs while learning fragments of his. The pack's den was carved into the side of a massive crystalline formation that jutted from the valley floor like a frozen wave. Inside, phosphorescent lichens provided gentle illumination, and the walls were lined with the soft fur shed by generations of Zarathi. It was here that Marcus would spend his formative years learning to hunt, to fight, and to think like a wolf while retaining the spark of human ingenuity that would one day save both species. Zara's milk was not compatible with human physiology, but the Zarathi were omnivores, and their diet included various fruits and nuts that could sustain a growing human child. The pack quickly adapted their hunting patterns to include food suitable for their unusual new member. They watched in fascination as Marcus grew, developing skills no Zarathi possessed while learning their ways with an adaptability that impressed even the skeptical Thorn. As the seasons changed on Kepler 442b, Marcus learned to read the subtle signs that warned of the great storms that periodically swept across the continent. He learned to identify which of the local fauna were dangerous and which could be safely hunted. Most importantly, he learned the pack's greatest secret. They were not the only intelligent species on this world. Deep in the mountain caves, Zara showed Marcus the ancient pictographs left by previous civilizations. Some depicted creatures that looked remarkably like humans, though they had disappeared long before the Zarathi achieved intelligence. Others showed great wars fought between the stars, with ships that bore an unsettling resemblance to the vessel that had brought the Vorthak Empire to human space. The pack had guarded these secrets for generations, understanding instinctively that knowledge of the past was power for the future. They shared this wisdom with Marcus because they recognized something in him that they had never seen before: the potential to bridge the gap between species, to unite different forms of intelligence against common threats. As Marcus approached his 6th birthday by Earth reckoning, his human traits became more pronounced while his adopted lupine characteristics deepened. He could howl with the best of them, communicate in the pack's complex gestural language, and track prey across impossible terrain. But he also retained human curiosity, human innovation, and human determination. The night sky above Kepler 442b was filled with stars that held no names for the Zarathi, but Marcus remembered fragments of lullabies his human parents had sung, songs about constellations and distant worlds. Looking up at those alien stars, he made a promise that would echo through the years ahead. Somehow, someday, he would find a way to honor both his human heritage and his Zarathi family. He had no way of knowing that in the depths of space, the Vorthak Empire was spreading like a plague across the galaxy, consuming world after world in their relentless expansion, nor could he know that the ancient enemy depicted in the cave paintings was returning, and that his unique upbringing would soon make him the most important individual in the galaxy. 12 years had passed since the crash, and Marcus Chen had grown into something unprecedented in the galaxy. A human raised by wolves who possessed the combined strengths of both species. Standing 6 feet tall with lean muscle built from years of hunting and survival, he moved through the crystalline forests of Kepler 442b with a grace that would have seemed impossible to his human ancestors. His dark hair hung long and wild, and his brown eyes held depths of understanding that came from seeing the world through both human and Zarathi perspectives. The pack had grown too, with new cubs born and raised alongside their human brother. Marcus had helped deliver several litters, his human hands proving invaluable for assisting with difficult births. To the younger Zarathi, he was simply another pack member, albeit one with strange talents and odd hairless skin. To the elders like Zara and Thorn, he represented something far more significant: hope for a future they could barely comprehend. The morning that changed everything began like any other. Marcus was teaching a group of yearling Zarathi cubs how to craft simple tools from crystalline rock formations when the sky began to burn. Streaks of fire lanced down from orbit, and the ground trembled with impacts that spoke of something massive entering the atmosphere. The adult pack members immediately went into defensive posture, but Marcus recognized what they could not. These were not random meteors but controlled re-entries. The Vorthak Empire had found Kepler 442b. The first scout ships landed in the valleys beyond the Great Crystal Ridge, their black hulls absorbing light like wounds in reality itself. Marcus watched from a concealed position as alien soldiers emerged, their movements precise and mechanical. The Vorthak were insectoid beings, evolved from hive-minded arthropods on a world where individual thought was a liability. They stood 8 feet tall on 6 legs, their carapaces gleaming with integrated technology that made them living weapons. What terrified Marcus most was not their appearance but their purpose. He watched through stolen Zarathi hunting scopes as the Vorthak systematically cataloged the local wildlife, taking specimens and conducting what could only be described as biological surveys. They were not here to conquer in the traditional sense. They were here to harvest. Every world they touched was stripped of its native life forms, which were then processed into biological components for their ever-expanding war machine. The pack's reaction was swift and unanimous. This was their territory, their world, and these invaders threatened everything they held dear. But Marcus understood the tactical situation better than his adopted family. The Vorthak possessed technology thousands of years in advance of anything the Zarathi had encountered. A direct confrontation would be suicide. That night, as the pack gathered in their den to plan their response, Marcus made a decision that would have far-reaching consequences. He accessed the crash site where his escape pod had rested for over a decade, using human engineering knowledge he had gradually developed to activate the pod's emergency systems. Deep in the pod's memory banks, he found star charts, technical specifications, and most importantly, historical records of the war between humanity and the Vorthak Empire. The data painted a grim picture. Humanity had been one of 17 species to resist Vorthak expansion in the past 1,000 years. All had failed. The human colonies had lasted longer than most, primarily due to humanity's unusual talent for adapting alien technology and unconventional warfare tactics. But even they had eventually fallen, their world stripped bare and their people processed into the Empire's biomechanical infrastructure. Yet Marcus also found something else in the data. References to ancient weapons caches hidden on various worlds, and coordinates for emergency rally points where human survivors might still gather. Most intriguingly, he discovered mentions of other species who had successfully hidden from Vorthak detection using techniques that seemed almost magical. As he studied the information, Marcus began to understand the true scope of his situation. He was not just a human raised by wolves. He was potentially the last free human in the galaxy, and his unique upbringing had given him capabilities that neither species possessed alone. The Zarathi pack structure and hunting tactics, combined with human strategic thinking and technological adaptation, created possibilities that had never existed before. The next few weeks were spent in careful reconnaissance and planning. Marcus used his human knowledge to understand Vorthak technology, while applying Zarathi stealth techniques to gather intelligence. He discovered that the invaders had established 3 base camps across the continent, each serving a different function in their harvesting operation. The largest was clearly a command center, while the other 2 appeared to be processing facilities where captured. Native life forms were analyzed and categorized. More disturbing was the discovery that the Vorthak had identified the Zarathi as a species of particular interest. Their intelligence and pack structure made them valuable candidates for conversion into biomechanical soldiers. Marcus intercepted transmissions indicating that capture operations would begin within days, starting with isolated pack territories and working inward toward the more populated regions. The revelation that his adopted family was specifically targeted filled Marcus with a cold fury that surprised him with its intensity. These aliens threatened not just individual lives but the entire culture and way of life that had shaped him into who he was. The Zarathi had given him everything: family, purpose, identity. Now it was time to return that gift. Working with Zara and the pack elders, Marcus developed a strategy that played to their unique strengths while exploiting Vorthak weaknesses he had identified in the historical records. The Empire's greatest strength was also its greatest vulnerability. Their hive-minded approach made them predictable and inflexible when faced with truly unexpected tactics. The plan called for a series of coordinated strikes designed not to destroy the Vorthak forces, which would be impossible with their current resources, but to create enough chaos and confusion to disrupt their harvesting schedule. If they could make Kepler 442b appear too costly to fully exploit, there was a chance the Vorthak might move on to easier targets, at least temporarily. But Marcus harbored a deeper ambition than mere survival. Hidden in the ancient cave paintings that had fascinated him since childhood, he had found references to technologies that predated both the Vorthak Empire and human civilization. The previous inhabitants of Kepler 442b had possessed knowledge that could potentially level the playing field, if only he could unlock their secrets. As the pack prepared for war, Marcus made another crucial discovery. While examining Vorthak communication frequencies, he detected something that made his blood run cold: similar transmissions coming from dozens of other star systems. The Empire was not just invading Kepler 442b, they were conducting simultaneous operations across an entire sector of the galaxy. The scope of the Vorthak expansion was beyond anything the historical records had suggested. They were not just harvesting individual worlds, they were systematically consuming entire regions of space, processing billions of life forms into their war machine. The mathematical projections Marcus calculated suggested that at their current rate of expansion, the Vorthak would control the entire galaxy within a century. That night, as he lay surrounded by his sleeping pack family, Marcus made a vow that would drive him for the rest of his life. He would not just save Kepler 442b or even the Zerathi, somehow using the unique combination of human ingenuity and Zerathi pack loyalty that had shaped him. He would find a way to stop the Vorthak Empire entirely. The galaxy needed a guardian, someone who could unite the scattered survivors of conquered worlds and forge them into a force capable of resistance. He had no army, no fleet, no advanced technology. But he had something the Vorthak had never encountered: the heart of a wolf and the mind of a human, tempered by years of survival on an alien world. It would have to be enough. The first strike came at dawn when the twin suns of Kepler 442b cast long shadows across the crystalline valleys. Marcus and his pack had spent weeks preparing for this moment, turning the alien landscape into a maze of traps and ambush points. The Vorthak harvesting expedition that emerged from their northern base camp expected easy prey. Instead, they walked into a nightmare that would be whispered about in their hive communications for generations. Marcus had studied their movement patterns obsessively, learning that Vorthak soldiers operated in rigid formations that maximized efficiency, but left them vulnerable to unconventional attacks. As the alien squad advanced through a narrow canyon where crystalline formations created natural choke points, the pack struck with coordinated precision that would have impressed human military tacticians. Zara led the initial assault, her massive form leaping from crystal outcropping to crystal outcropping with impossible grace. Her powerful jaws clamped down on the leading Vorthak's carapace, finding the weak joints that Marcus had identified from his study of their anatomy. The alien's biomechanical augmentation sparked and failed as Zerathi claws found vulnerable neural interfaces. But the true innovation came from Marcus himself. Using primitive tools crafted from local materials, he had created electromagnetic pulse devices that disrupted Vorthak technology without requiring advanced manufacturing capabilities. As the pack engaged in close combat, Marcus triggered his improvised weapons, causing the aliens' integrated systems to malfunction at critical moments. The Vorthak squad was eliminated within minutes, but Marcus knew this victory was only the beginning. The aliens' hive-mind communication meant that their command structure would soon adapt to these new tactics. Every future engagement would be progressively more difficult as the Empire learned from its losses. Over the following days, similar attacks struck Vorthak positions across the continent. Marcus had convinced several other Zerathi packs to join the resistance, using his unique position as both human and pack member to forge alliances between groups that had historically been territorial rivals. The concept of species-wide cooperation was foreign to traditional Zerathi culture, but the existential threat posed by the Vorthak made such unprecedented unity possible. The guerrilla campaign achieved something Marcus had not dared hope for. It began attracting attention from other species. Deep space monitoring stations detected the unusual energy signatures of Vorthak equipment being systematically destroyed on what was supposed to be a routine harvesting operation. For the first time in decades, a Vorthak expedition was losing equipment faster than it could be replaced. 3 weeks into the resistance campaign, everything changed when a battered ship limped into Kepler 442b's system broadcasting human emergency codes. Marcus received the transmission through salvaged equipment from his original escape pod, and the voice that emerged from the static made his heart race with emotions he had thought long buried. Captain Sarah Chen, his aunt and one of the few human survivors from a network of hidden colonies, had been monitoring Vorthak communications. When she detected the disruption on Kepler 442b, the energy signatures of the destroyed equipment told a story that seemed impossible. Someone was using pre-industrial technology, enhanced with advanced theoretical principles to neutralize Vorthak forces. The reunion between Marcus and Captain Chen was emotional beyond words. She had assumed her nephew died with the rest of the New Eden colonists 15 years earlier. To find him not only alive but leading an effective resistance movement against the Vorthak Empire challenged everything she thought she knew about survival in the post-human galaxy. Captain Chen brought devastating news about the state of the galaxy beyond. Kepler 442b, the human resistance, had been reduced to fewer than 50,000 survivors scattered across hidden bases in the most remote systems. The Vorthak Empire now controlled thousands of worlds, and their expansion showed no signs of slowing. Worse, intelligence indicated they were preparing for something called the Final Harvest, a coordinated operation designed to eliminate all remaining pockets of resistance simultaneously. But she also brought hope in the form of information about other resistance movements. Scattered groups of survivors from dozens of species were fighting losing battles across the galaxy, each believing they were alone in their struggle. The Kethavar, a silicon-based species with natural electromagnetic abilities, had managed to destroy several Vorthak installations before being driven underground. The Solani, energy beings capable of possessing electronic systems, had corrupted entire Vorthak databases before disappearing into deep space. Marcus realized that his success on Kepler 442b represented something unprecedented, a template for effective resistance that could be replicated across multiple worlds. The combination of pack tactics, unconventional technology, and intimate knowledge of local environments could turn any planet into a fortress against Vorthak expansion. Working with Captain Chen, Marcus began developing plans that went far beyond simple survival. They would turn Kepler 442b into a base of operations for galaxy-wide resistance, using the planet's unique crystalline formations to create communication networks that could reach across interstellar distances. The Zarathi's natural pack structure provided an ideal organizational model for resistance cells, while human strategic thinking offered the flexibility needed to adapt to changing circumstances. The first step was expanding the resistance beyond the Zarathi. Marcus had observed other intelligent species on Kepler 442b during his years of exploration, including the Lumini, crystalline beings who existed partially in subspace and could manipulate matter at the molecular level. Convincing them to join the fight required diplomatic skills that neither humans nor Zarathi possessed naturally, but Marcus's unique perspective allowed him to understand their nonlinear thought processes. The alliance with the Lumini transformed the resistance from a guerrilla movement into something approaching a proper military force. Their ability to phase in and out of normal space made them perfect for reconnaissance and sabotage operations, while their molecular manipulation capabilities allowed for the creation of weapons and tools that seemed to violate the laws of physics. As the coalition grew stronger, the Vorthak response became increasingly desperate. Additional forces were deployed to Kepler 442b, including specialized hunter-killer teams designed specifically to eliminate resistance movements. The aliens began employing scorched earth tactics, destroying entire ecosystems in attempts to flush out the rebels. But every escalation by the Vorthak only strengthened the resistance's resolve and expanded their recruitment pool. Species that had previously remained neutral were forced to choose sides as their homelands were devastated by Imperial forces. The message was clear. There was no safety in surrender, no mercy for those who hoped to avoid the Empire's attention through passivity. Marcus found himself evolving from a guerrilla fighter into something approaching a general, coordinating operations across multiple continents while maintaining the pack bonds that gave him strength. His human strategic thinking and Zarathi emotional intelligence created a leadership style that resonated with beings from radically different backgrounds. The turning point came when the Resistance successfully captured a Vorthak communication array intact. Using Captain Chen's technical expertise and Lumini molecular manipulation, they managed to decrypt Imperial communication protocols and gain access to strategic planning databases. What they discovered changed everything they thought they knew about the war. The Vorthak Empire was not just conquering the galaxy. They were preparing to abandon it entirely. The Final Harvest was designed to strip every useful resource from their conquered territories before moving on to extragalactic targets. They viewed the Milky Way as nothing more than a temporary feeding ground, valuable only for the biological and technological resources it could provide. For their true goal, the conquest of neighboring galaxies. This revelation transformed the Resistance's mission from survival to salvation. They were not just fighting for their own lives or even their own worlds. They were fighting for the future of every living being in the galaxy. The stakes could not have been higher, and the responsibility weighed heavily on Marcus's shoulders. But with great responsibility came great opportunity. If the Vorthak could be stopped here, their expansion into other galaxies could be prevented. The Resistance had a chance to save not just the Milky Way but countless other galaxies that would otherwise fall to Imperial conquest as Marcus stood on the crystal cliffs overlooking the valleys, where he had first learned to hunt. He felt the weight of destiny settling on his shoulders. The abandoned human child raised by alien wolves had become something the galaxy had never seen before. A bridge between species, a unifier of the scattered and broken, a guardian standing between civilization and extinction. The ancient ruins discovered deep beneath Kepler 442b's surface changed everything Marcus thought he knew about the galaxy's history. Following coordinates decrypted from Vorthak communications, the Resistance had been searching for weapons caches when Lumini phase scanners detected massive structures buried beneath miles of crystal formations. What they found defied all understanding of technological development and temporal mechanics. The ruins belonged to a civilization that called themselves the Architects, beings who had existed in the galaxy millions of years before the first Vorthak hive emerged from their homeworld's primordial swamps. Unlike the Empire's philosophy of consumption and expansion, the Architects had been builders and gardeners, seeding countless worlds with life and establishing the fundamental patterns that would govern galactic evolution for eons to come. Marcus descended into the ruins with a mixed team of humans, Zerathi and Lumini, their diverse abilities complementing each other as they navigated chambers that seemed to shift and flow according to principles beyond conventional physics. The Architects had built their installations to last until the heat death of the universe, using technologies that manipulated space-time itself to ensure perfect preservation. The central chamber contained something that took Marcus's breath away. A vast three-dimensional map of the galaxy, showing the movements of countless species across millions of years. Golden threads traced the rise and fall of civilizations, while crimson markers indicated the spread of what could only be Vorthak influence. But most remarkably, the map showed branching probability threads extending into the future, suggesting that the Architects had possessed some form of precognitive capability. According to the ancient records, the Architects had foreseen the eventual rise of the Vorthak Empire and had taken steps to ensure that resistance would be possible when the time came. They had seeded key worlds with hidden technologies and had carefully guided evolution to produce species with the specific capabilities needed to counter imperial expansion. The Zerathi's pack intelligence, humanity's adaptability, the Lumini's phase-shifting abilities, all were part of a grand design stretching across geological time. Most shocking of all was the revelation that Marcus himself had been anticipated. The Architect's probability calculations had identified the potential for a hybrid individual who combined multiple species' strengths, and they had arranged for the necessary circumstances to bring such a being into existence. His parents' escape pod had not landed on Kepler 442b by accident. It had been guided there by automated systems the Architects had left dormant for millions of years. The weight of this knowledge was almost crushing. Marcus had always believed his unique upbringing was the result of tragic circumstances, transformed by the Zerathi's compassion. To learn that it was part of an ancient plan to create a galactic guardian challenged his fundamental understanding of free will and destiny. But the Architects had left more than just revelations about the past. Deep in the ruins' heart lay the Guardian Protocol, a collection of technologies and strategies specifically designed to counter Vorthak expansion. The protocol included blueprints for weapons that could disrupt the Empire's hive-mind communications, defensive systems that could protect entire star systems from invasion, and most remarkably, a method for awakening latent psionic abilities in species that had never demonstrated such capabilities. The Zerathi pack bond, Marcus learned, was actually a primitive form of telepathic communication that could be enhanced and expanded using Architect technology. When fully activated, it would allow for instantaneous coordination between resistance cells across galactic distances, creating a network of minds that could outthink and outmaneuver the rigid Vorthak command structure. Implementing the Guardian Protocol required resources and coordination on a scale that dwarfed anything the Resistance had attempted before. They needed to establish hidden bases on dozens of worlds, recruit and train operatives from scores of species, and somehow manufacture advanced technologies using primitive industrial capabilities. The task seemed impossible until Marcus proposed a radical solution. They would use the Vorthak Empire's own expansion against them. Every imperial harvesting operation followed the same pattern. Survey, categorize, harvest, process, move on. During the processing phase, Massive industrial facilities were established on conquered worlds to convert biological matter into the components needed for further expansion. These facilities represented the Empire's greatest strength and its greatest vulnerability. They were heavily defended, but also entirely predictable in their operations. Marcus's plan called for infiltrating these processing facilities and sabotaging them from within. But instead of simple destruction, the Resistance would corrupt the Imperial manufacturing process, introducing Guardian Protocol technologies into the very heart of the Vorthak war machine. The Empire's own expansion would spread Resistance capabilities across the galaxy, creating sleeper agents and hidden weapons caches in every conquered system. The first test of this strategy came on Xerion Prime, a world that had fallen to Imperial forces 6 months earlier. The planet's crystalline-based lifeforms had been harvested and were being processed into biomechanical components for Vorthak starships. A team led by Marcus successfully infiltrated the primary processing facility, using Lumini phase-shifting abilities to bypass security systems and Zerathi pack tactics to neutralize guards. Once inside, they discovered the true horror of Imperial operations. Millions of sentient beings were being held in stasis while their biological and neural patterns were analyzed and categorized. Those deemed useful were processed into components for Vorthak technology, while the rest were simply disintegrated and their matter recycled. The scale of the genocide was beyond anything Marcus had imagined, even in his darkest nightmares. But the facility also represented an opportunity. Using Guardian Protocol techniques, the Resistance team began subtly altering the processing algorithms, introducing code that would create hidden vulnerabilities in Imperial technology. When Vorthak ships built with the corrupted components encountered specific frequency patterns, their systems would experience cascading failures that appeared to be random malfunctions. More importantly, the team managed to rescue nearly 1,000 survivors from the stasis chambers and evacuate them to hidden bases prepared by advanced teams. These survivors included members of 17 different species, each bringing unique capabilities and knowledge that strengthened the Resistance network. The success on Xerion Prime was repeated on world after world as the Resistance refined their techniques and expanded their operations. The Guardian Protocol technologies proved remarkably adaptable, working equally well whether implemented by silicon-based engineers, energy beings, or traditional biological species. The architects had designed their systems to be truly universal, transcending the limitations of any single evolutionary path. But success brought new challenges. The Vorthak Empire began to notice patterns in the seemingly random equipment failures plaguing their operations. Imperial scientists started investigating the anomalies, and it was only a matter of time before they traced the problems back to the processing facilities. Once that happened, the Resistance's greatest advantage would be neutralized. Marcus knew they needed to accelerate their timeline. Intelligence gathered from corrupted Imperial databases indicated that the final harvest was scheduled to begin within 18 months. If the Resistance was going to have any chance of stopping the Empire's exodus from the galaxy, they needed to move beyond sabotage and infiltration to open warfare. The plan that emerged from marathon strategy sessions in the crystal caves of Kepler 442b was audacious beyond anything previously attempted. Instead of trying to defeat the Vorthak Empire through traditional military means, the Resistance would target the Empire's greatest weakness: their complete dependence on hive mind coordination. Every Vorthak installation in the galaxy was connected through a vast subspace communication network that allowed for instantaneous coordination across impossible distances. This network was what made their rapid expansion possible, enabling them to coordinate simultaneous operations on thousands of worlds. But it was also a single point of failure that could bring down the entire Empire if properly exploited using Guardian Protocol technologies and the enhanced pack bond network, connecting Resistance cells across the galaxy. Marcus planned to launch a coordinated assault on every major Vorthak communication hub simultaneously. The goal was not to destroy the network but to corrupt it, introducing viral code that would spread throughout the Imperial command structure and gradually subvert their ability to coordinate. Large-scale operations, the attack would require perfect timing and coordination on a galactic scale. Every Resistance cell would need to strike at exactly the same moment, overwhelming the Empire's ability to respond before they could implement countermeasures. It would be a single throw of the dice that would determine the fate of every living being in the galaxy. The galaxy held its breath in the moments before the assault began. Across thousands of star systems, resistance cells waited in perfect synchronization, their minds linked through the enhanced pack bond network that had grown from Marcus's unique connection with the Zerathi. The network hummed with controlled tension, millions of different species united in purpose for the first time in galactic history. Marcus stood in the command center carved deep within Kepler 442b's crystal formations. His consciousness stretched across impossible distances as he coordinated the largest military operation ever attempted. Through the pack bond, he could feel the emotions and thoughts of resistance fighters hiding in asteroid fields, lurking in abandoned space stations and infiltrating Imperial facilities on 1,000 different worlds. Each mind was a note in a vast symphony of rebellion that the Vorthak Empire had never imagined possible. The target list was staggering in its scope. Primary communication hubs on 8-47 major Imperial worlds, secondary relay stations throughout 23 galactic sectors, and the master control nexus hidden in the Vorthak home system itself. Intelligence gathered over months of infiltration had identified every critical node in the Empire's communication network, from massive installations protected by entire fleets to tiny relay satellites orbiting remote gas giants. The resistance had grown far beyond anything Marcus had envisioned during those early days of guerrilla warfare. The Guardian Protocol had awakened latent abilities in dozens of species, creating new forms of cooperation and understanding that transcended traditional biological limitations. Gaseous beings from the Helix Nebula could now phase-link with crystalline entities from the Outer Rim, while cybernetic refugees from fallen human colonies worked seamlessly alongside organic telepaths from species that had never developed technology. At exactly 1427 Galactic Standard Time, Marcus sent the activation pulse through the pack bond network. The assault began simultaneously across the galaxy, as millions of resistance fighters emerged from hiding to strike at the heart of Vorthak power. On Terminus Station, the Empire's largest communication hub in the Beta Quadrant, a team of enhanced humans led by Captain Chen used Guardian Protocol devices to overload the station's primary transmitters. The resulting cascade failure sent corrupted data streams racing through Imperial networks at faster-than-light speeds, introducing viral code that would begin systematically degrading Vorthak coordination capabilities. In the Horsehead Nebula, a squadron of Lumini phase shifters materialized inside a heavily shielded relay station and began rearranging its molecular structure from within. The station's defenses were useless against enemies who existed partially outside normal spacetime. And within minutes, the facility was broadcasting Guardian Protocol override codes to every Imperial ship in the sector. On the fringes of the Vorthak home system, a group of modified asteroids that had been drifting unnoticed for months suddenly revealed themselves to be camouflaged resistance vessels. Using stealth technologies reverse-engineered from captured Imperial equipment, they had penetrated the most heavily defended system in the galaxy without triggering a single alarm. Their target was the Master Control Nexus that coordinated all Imperial operations across multiple galaxies. The Nexus was a artificial moon-sized structure that housed the physical infrastructure, supporting the Vorthak hive mind network. Destroying it would have been impossible with conventional weapons, but the Resistance wasn't trying to destroy it. Instead, they planned to corrupt it, introducing Guardian Protocol algorithms that would gradually subvert the entire Imperial command structure. Marcus felt the battle rage through the pack bond as if he were personally present at every engagement. The enhanced telepathic network allowed him to coordinate responses in real time, shifting resources and tactical support to wherever they were most needed. When Imperial reinforcements arrived at the Terminus Station assault, he instantly redirected nearby resistance cells to create diversionary attacks that split the enemy response. When Vorthak forces began adapting to Lumini phase-shifting tactics, he transmitted new frequency patterns that restored the rebels' tactical advantage. But the Empire was not defenseless. As the scope of the coordinated assault became clear, Imperial commanders began implementing contingency protocols that had been developed over centuries of conquest. Automated defense systems activated across thousands of worlds, while reserve fleets moved to protect critical installations. The Vorthak's greatest strength, their ability to coordinate responses across galactic distances, was being turned against them, but they still possessed overwhelming numerical superiority. The battle for the Master Control Nexus became the focal point of the entire operation. If the Resistance could corrupt the central hub, the viral code would spread to every Imperial facility in the galaxy within hours. But the Nexus was protected by defensive systems that made it virtually impregnable, including energy shields that could deflect Starship-grade weapons and automated weapon platforms that could track and destroy targets, moving at significant fractions of light speed. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Deep within the Nexus structure, billions of biological processors harvested from conquered species provided the computational power needed to maintain the hive mind network. These processors retained fragments of their original consciousness, creating a vast reservoir of suppressed minds that had been enslaved to serve Imperial purposes. Using Guardian Protocol techniques, the Resistance team managed to establish contact with these imprisoned consciousness fragments. The architect's technology included methods for awakening and coordinating such distributed intelligence networks, transforming them from slaves into active allies. Within the Nexus itself, a rebellion began as millions of harvested minds turned against their Imperial masters. The internal uprising created the opening the Resistance needed. As Vorthak security forces rushed to contain the revolt among their biological processors, infiltration teams managed to reach the Nexus core and begin uploading Guardian Protocol viral code directly into the master control systems. The process would take hours to complete, but once finished it would irrevocably corrupt every aspect of Imperial operations. Across the galaxy, the pattern repeated on smaller scales. Resistance fighters reached their targets and began uploading viral code while Imperial forces scrambled to understand and counter the coordinated assault. The Guardian Protocol proved remarkably effective at avoiding Vorthak countermeasures, adapting and evolving faster than Imperial technicians could develop defenses. But victory came at a terrible cost. Entire Resistance cells sacrificed themselves to ensure their uploads completed successfully. On Zerion Prime, the team that had first tested the infiltration tactics held their position against overwhelming odds, continuing to transmit viral code even as Imperial forces overran their position. In the Andromeda Relay Station, a group of human refugees chose to detonate their ship's fusion reactor rather than allow Imperial forces to capture Guardian Protocol technology. Marcus felt each loss through the pack bond, the death of every Resistance fighter echoing through his consciousness like a physical blow. The enhanced telepathic network that allowed him to coordinate the operation also forced him to experience every sacrifice, every moment of pain and terror as brave beings gave their lives for the chance to save the galaxy. As the hours passed, the tide of battle gradually turned in the Resistance's favor. The viral code spreading through Imperial networks began to have visible effects as Vorthak ships started experiencing navigation failures, communication breakdowns, and weapons malfunctions. The Empire's rigid command structure, dependent on perfect coordination and instantaneous communication, began to fracture as the corruption spread. The breakthrough moment came when the Master Control Nexus finally fell completely under Guardian Protocol control. The massive installation that had coordinated Imperial expansion across multiple galaxies suddenly began broadcasting liberation codes to every conquered world. Stasis chambers holding billions of prisoners began opening. Weapon systems turned against their Imperial operators, and processing facilities shut down or began producing Guardian Protocol technologies instead of Imperial components. The effect cascaded across the galaxy at faster-than-light speeds as the corrupted Nexus sent override commands to every Imperial installation. Within hours, the Vorthak Empire's ability to coordinate large-scale operations had been completely eliminated. Individual units and installations could still function, but the vast machine of conquest that had consumed countless worlds ground to a halt. But Marcus knew the victory was incomplete. The viral code had crippled the Empire's expansion capabilities, but millions of Vorthak forces remained scattered across the galaxy. Without central coordination, they would likely turn to desperate measures, potentially destroying entire worlds rather than allowing them to fall back into Resistance hands. The real work of liberation was just beginning. The galaxy had been freed from the threat of Imperial expansion, but healing the wounds left by centuries of conquest would require everything the Resistance 6 months after the fall of the Vorthak communication network, the galaxy had become a patchwork of liberated worlds, desperate refugees, and scattered Imperial remnants fighting losing battles against local resistance movements. The Guardian Protocol's viral code had achieved everything Marcus had hoped for and more. But the aftermath of liberation presented challenges no ancient architect database had prepared him to face. Standing in what had once been the Vorthak, Empire's primary administrative complex on the conquered world of Helios 7, Marcus surveyed the chaos of reconstruction. The massive structure had been built using the processed remains of the planet's original inhabitants, its biomechanical walls literally constructed from the bones and neural tissue of billions of murdered beings. Now those same walls hummed with Guardian Protocol energy as they were slowly converted back into forms that could support life rather than facilitate death. The liberation had unleashed forces that no single individual could control, no matter how enhanced their abilities or how vast their telepathic network. On thousands of worlds, newly freed populations were demanding immediate revenge against Vorthak collaborators and processing facility managers. Many liberated species had been so thoroughly traumatized by Imperial occupation that they could barely function without the rigid hierarchies that had oppressed them for generations. More troubling were the reports filtering in from the galaxy's outer regions, where some Imperial remnants had chosen to implement final sterilization protocols rather than face defeat. 7 star systems had already been rendered uninhabitable by desperate Vorthak commanders who had triggered stellar detonation devices, destroying billions of lives in acts of spite that served no strategic purpose. The resistance network that had proven so effective during the war was straining under the demands of peacetime governance. Species that had worked together seamlessly while facing extinction now found themselves in conflict over resource allocation, territorial boundaries, and fundamental questions about how galactic civilization should be restructured. The Kethvar crystalline beings insisted that all artificial intelligence should be banned to prevent future enslavement, while the cybernetic human refugees argued that integrated AI was essential for managing the complexity of galactic civilization. The Solani energy entities wanted to abandon physical space entirely and retreat to higher dimensional planes, while Earth-based species needed material resources to rebuild their devastated worlds. Marcus found himself mediating disputes that would have been unimaginable during the dark days of Imperial expansion. The enhanced Pac-Bond network that had coordinated military operations was poorly suited for the nuanced negotiations required to balance competing interests and historical grievances. Every decision he made risked alienating entire species or regions, potentially fragmenting the unity that had made victory possible. The situation was further complicated by the discovery of architect facilities on dozens of newly liberated worlds. Each installation contained technologies and knowledge that could revolutionize galactic civilization, but also raised disturbing questions about the extent to which current events had been predetermined by ancient design. Some species viewed the architects as benevolent guardians who had protected the galaxy from extinction, while others saw them as manipulative puppeteers who had orchestrated eons of suffering to achieve their own mysterious goals. The most challenging discovery came from the ruins on Sanctuary Prime, where architect records revealed the true scope of their intervention in galactic evolution. The ancient civilization had not merely foreseen the rise of the Vorthak Empire, they had deliberately allowed it to happen, viewing Imperial expansion as a necessary catalyst for the kind of cross-species cooperation that would be required for the galaxy's eventual maturation. According to the Architect Archives, the Vorthak were themselves the products of ancient manipulation, their hyper-aggressive expansion drive artificially enhanced through genetic modifications, performed millions of years before their species achieved spaceflight. The Empire's conquest of the galaxy had been orchestrated to create the exact conditions that would force diverse species to transcend their biological limitations and work together for survival. The revelation that the entire war had been planned by beings long dead sparked outrage across the liberated galaxy. Trillions had died to serve the architect's vision of galactic unity, their lives sacrificed on the altar of some cosmic evolutionary experiment. The fact that the manipulation had ultimately succeeded in creating unprecedented cooperation between species provided little comfort to those who had lost everything to imperial conquest. Marcus struggled with his own reaction to these revelations. His entire life, from his parents' escape pod landing on Kepler 442b to his unique upbringing among the Zerathi, had been choreographed by ancient intelligences pursuing goals he could barely comprehend. Even his role as Galactic Guardian had been anticipated and planned for, his choices shaped by circumstances that were themselves the products of architect intervention. But as he worked with survivors from hundreds of species to rebuild their shattered worlds, Marcus began to understand something the ancient records had not explicitly stated. The architects' greatest gift had not been their technology or their foreknowledge, but their understanding that consciousness itself transcended the boundaries of biology, culture, and time. The pack bond network that connected the liberated galaxy was not just a communication system. It was the emergence of a new form of collective intelligence that incorporated the strengths of every participating species. The proof came during the crisis on Vialthara, where a massive Vorthak dreadnought had remained hidden in the system's asteroid belt for months after the communication network's collapse. When the ship finally emerged to launch a desperate final attack on the planet's population centers, the local defense forces found themselves completely outmatched by Imperial technology that had been designed to destroy entire fleets. But the response that emerged through the Pac-Bond network demonstrated something unprecedented in galactic history. Within minutes of the attack beginning, volunteers from dozens of species began coordinating a response that drew on their combined capabilities in ways that no single civilization could have achieved. Lumini phase shifters provided real-time reconnaissance from inside the enemy ship, while Kethvar electromagnetic manipulators disrupted its power systems. Human tactical analysts coordinated targeting solutions calculated by crystalline computational matrices, while Zerathi pack leaders organized refugee evacuations using instincts refined over millions of years of evolution. The dreadnought was neutralized within hours, not through superior firepower, but through the kind of flexible, creative cooperation that the rigid Imperial command structure could never have countered. More importantly, the entire operation had been conducted without any central authority or predetermined chain of command. The liberated species had spontaneously organized themselves into an effective fighting force through pure cooperative instinct. Marcus realized that this was what the architects had truly been working toward. Not the defeat of the Vorthak Empire specifically, but the emergence of a form of galactic consciousness capable of facing any challenge through voluntary cooperation rather than forced unity. The Pac-Bond network was evolving beyond its original purpose, becoming the foundation for a new kind of civilization that transcended the limitations of individual species or cultures. The reconstruction efforts began to show remarkable progress as this new form of cooperation took hold. On world after world, liberated populations found ways to work together that drew on their unique strengths while compensating for their individual weaknesses. Former Imperial processing facilities were converted into multi-species research centers where beings with radically different physiologies and thought processes collaborated on projects that would have been impossible for any single civilization to attempt. The Guardian Protocol technologies proved to be just the beginning. As different species shared their knowledge and capabilities through the Pac-Bond network, entirely new forms of science and technology began to emerge. Energy beings helped material species understand the fundamental structures of space-time, while biological entities taught artificial intelligences about the importance of evolutionary adaptation. The resulting innovations promised to usher in an age of prosperity and discovery that would dwarf anything achieved by previous galactic civilizations. But Marcus knew that the real test lay ahead. The liberated galaxy was still fragile, held together by the shared trauma of Imperial occupation and the excitement of newfound freedom. As memories of the war faded and new generations grew up without experiencing the threat of extinction, would the cooperation that had made victory possible survive the mundane challenges of daily governance? Standing in the converted administrative complex as reports of successful reconstruction efforts flooded in from across the galaxy, Marcus felt a profound sense of hope tempered by realistic caution. The abandoned human child raised by alien wolves had helped save galactic civilization, but the harder task of helping it thrive had only just begun. 25 years had passed since the fall of the Vorthak Empire, and the galaxy bore little resemblance to the war-torn collection of conquered worlds that Marcus had helped liberate. Standing on the observation deck of Harmony Station, the massive space habitat that served as the Galactic Cooperation Council's headquarters, he watched ships from hundreds of different species arriving for the Silver Jubilee celebration, marking a quarter-century of peace and cooperation. The station itself was a testament to how far galactic civilization had advanced. Built using technologies that combined architect knowledge with innovations developed through cross-species collaboration, Harmony Station existed partially in normal space and partially in higher dimensions, accessible only to energy-based beings. Its living biomechanical walls incorporated both crystalline matrices and organic neural networks, creating a structure that was simultaneously artificial and alive, technological and biological. Marcus had aged well, his human physiology enhanced by Guardian protocol modifications that had extended his lifespan and maintained his physical capabilities at their peak. His hair was now streaked with silver, and his face bore the lines that came from decades of carrying the weight of galactic leadership, but his eyes still held the fierce intelligence and protective instincts that had been shaped by his unique upbringing among the Zerathi. The Pac-Bond network had evolved far beyond its original military purpose, becoming the foundation for a new form of democratic governance that allowed every sentient being in the galaxy to participate in decisions that affected them. The network now connected over 4 trillion individual minds across millions of worlds, creating a collective intelligence that could address challenges of unprecedented complexity while still respecting the autonomy and dignity of every participant. The transformation had not been without its difficulties. The early years of Reconstruction had seen numerous conflicts as different species struggled to find their place in the new galactic order. The Vorthak survivors, in particular, had required generations of rehabilitation as they learned to function as individuals rather than components of a hive mind. Many had chosen to undergo radical genetic modifications that eliminated their species' original aggressive tendencies, while others had voluntarily exiled themselves to isolated worlds where they could live without risking harm to other species. But the most remarkable achievement was not the absence of major conflicts, but the presence of genuine friendship and cooperation between beings who had previously seen each other as incomprehensible aliens. Children born on Lumini phase ships learned to play games that required them to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, while Zerathi cubs grew up considering crystalline beings and energy entities to be natural parts of their extended pack family. The economic transformation had been equally dramatic. The scarcity-based economics that had driven expansion and conquest for millions of years had been replaced by abundance sharing systems that ensured every being had access to the resources needed for a fulfilling life. Guardian protocol technologies had made energy effectively unlimited, while matter manipulation capabilities meant that material resources could be created or transformed at need. Perhaps most importantly, the galaxy had developed a robust system for managing the inevitable conflicts that arose between different species and cultures. The mediation protocols developed through decades of trial and error provided frameworks for resolving disputes that respected the fundamental values and needs of all parties involved. Complex disagreements that might once have led to interstellar wars were now resolved through collaborative, problem-solving sessions that often resulted in solutions neither side had originally imagined. To me, scientific advances achieved through cross-species collaboration had exceeded even the most optimistic projections. Research teams that included beings with radically different forms of consciousness had unlocked secrets of physics that had remained hidden for billions of years. They had developed technologies that allowed for instantaneous travel between distant galaxies, communication with intelligences that existed in parallel dimensions, and even limited forms of temporal manipulation that enabled them to study and learn from alternative evolutionary paths. But Marcus's greatest pride was reserved for the social and cultural achievements that had transformed daily life for ordinary beings across the galaxy. Art forms had emerged that could only be appreciated by minds linked through the Pac-Bond network, creating aesthetic experiences that transcended the limitations of any single sensory modality. Literature and music now incorporated emotional and conceptual elements that could only be expressed through direct mind-to-mind communication, resulting in cultural works of unprecedented depth and beauty. The children, especially had adapted to the new galactic civilization with remarkable ease. Young beings who had grown up with the pack bond network active from birth displayed forms of empathy and cooperation that amazed even the researchers who studied them. They seemed incapable of the kind of species-based prejudice that had characterized earlier eras, viewing diversity of form and thought as natural and desirable rather than threatening. On this particular day, as representatives from every known species gathered to celebrate their shared achievements, Marcus found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought them to this point. The abandoned human child who had crashed on Kepler 442b 48 years earlier could never have imagined the galaxy that now existed, but he recognized the same fundamental drives that had motivated his Zerathi pack family. The need to protect those who could not protect themselves, the desire to ensure that all pack members could thrive, and the understanding that diversity made the whole stronger than any of its individual parts. The celebration itself was a marvel of cross-species coordination. Beings who existed as pure energy performed dances that painted auroras across the station's sky, while crystalline entities created harmonic resonances that could be felt in dimensions human senses couldn't access. Zerathi pack leaders led ceremonial hunts through holographic environments, while human musicians composed symphonies that incorporated the emotional harmonics transmitted through the pack bond network. But the most moving moment came when Zara's great-great-granddaughter, now the alpha of the original Kepler 442b pack, presented Marcus with a ceremonial crystal that contained recorded memories from every Zerathi who had contributed to his upbringing. The gift represented more than just personal sentiment. It symbolized the recognition that his human heritage and Zerathi upbringing were both essential parts of the foundation upon which galactic civilization now rested. The formal ceremonies included presentations of the remarkable achievements that had been accomplished through cooperation. Medical researchers had eliminated disease and extended lifespans for every known species. Environmental restoration teams had rehabilitated thousands of worlds that had been damaged by imperial exploitation. Archaeological expeditions had uncovered the histories of dozens of species that had been thought permanently lost to Vorthak conquest. Perhaps most remarkably, exploration teams had made contact with civilizations in neighboring galaxies, sharing the Guardian Protocol technologies and cooperation frameworks that had made their own transformation possible. The spread of these ideas beyond the Milky Way represented the fulfillment of the architect's ultimate vision, the establishment of cooperation and mutual aid as fundamental principles governing interactions between all forms of intelligent life. As the celebration reached its climax, Marcus found himself called upon to address the assembled representatives, standing before beings whose diversity would have been inconceivable to previous generations. He spoke not as a supreme leader or ultimate authority, but as a guardian who had helped shepherd the galaxy through its darkest period into an age of unprecedented hope and possibility. His words were transmitted through the pack bond network to every connected mind in the galaxy, reaching beings on the most remote outposts and isolated research stations. But the message was simple and direct, reflecting the lessons he had learned from his earliest days among the Zerathi. Every being had value, every perspective contributed to the whole, and the strength of the pack was measured not by its ability to dominate others, but by its commitment to protecting and nurturing all its members. As the festivities continued into the night cycle, Marcus stepped out onto one of the station's observation decks and looked up at the stars. The galaxy was vast beyond comprehension, filled with wonders and challenges that would require countless generations to fully explore and understand. But for the first time in galactic history, those challenges would be met not through conquest and exploitation, but through cooperation and mutual support. The abandoned human child raised by alien wolves had become exactly what the galaxy needed. Not a ruler or conqueror, but a guardian who had helped every species learn to be guardians for each other. The future stretched ahead, bright with infinite possibility, and Marcus knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, they would be met by a galaxy united in its diversity and strong in its commitment to the protection and flourishing of all life.